I am forever.
We have such sights to show you Hellraiser, with every Hellraiser film explained in detail and an exploration of the future of the franchise. Hellraiser films are regarded by many as one of the best and longest-running horror series in history. However, some critique the lack of diversity in the plots of the subsequent sequels or raise concerns regarding the budgetary constraints that afflict the films. Nonetheless, no true horror aficionado can dispute that Clive Barker's 1987 film was nothing short of classic. Although the sequels may not have attained the same acclaim as the original, they are commendable horror films in their own right. Noteworthy horror films, such as The Thing and Candyman, were adapted from short stories or novellas, and Hellraiser follows a similar path. Clive Barker authored the novella The Hellbound Heart in 1986, and shortly thereafter, he was directing a film based on his own literary work. It was his revolutionary style of storytelling that rendered the film's characters and monsters particularly compelling. Cenobites are demonic entities hailing from an intricate, labyrinthine realm of torment governed by Leviathan, the deity of flesh and pleasure. All Cenobites perceive flesh as a medium for craftsmanship, an entity to be molded into artworks. They exist to serve their master and defend his labyrinth, an environment strikingly reminiscent of hell. The Cenobites may be regarded as demons who act under the command of their leader, known as Pinhead. These demons traverse various realms in pursuit of carnal delights, facilitated by a portal or a puzzle box referred to as the Lament configuration. The most intriguing aspect of this box is that upon its usage, the Cenobites manifest and endeavor to expose the individual to otherworldly pleasures. However, this pleasure appears to resemble gruesome torture for weaker individuals. This paradoxical nature complicates the determination of whether they are angelic or demonic. For instance, they are considered angels by those who embrace sadomasochism, yet they are perceived as demonic by others. Nonetheless, Pinhead prefers to view himself as an explorer of different realms. He describes both himself and his companions as explorers in pursuit of discovering novel forms of pleasure and pain, having reached such a profound hedonism that for them, pain and pleasure have merged into a singular experience. However, as the series progressed, the Cenobites began to resemble biblical demons who exact punishment on sinners. By the 10th installment, there were allusions to concepts such as the 10 Commandments and Judgment Day. After Clive Barker, if there is one individual who contributed significantly to the franchise's success, it is Doug Bradley, the actor who portrayed Pinhead in the first 8 films. His mere presence served as a compelling draw for the audience. Let's take a deep dive into all 10 Hellraiser movies to understand the plot and what makes these films cult classics. That being said, we'll also discuss a few red flags that have surfaced along the way. So grab your toys and enter your red rooms, because we're about to take you on a hellish sadomasochistic thrill ride. Before we get into our explanations, we have a small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. It's a small click for you, but it means a lot to us. Thank you. Let's get started. We'll tear your soul apart. 1987. Frank Cotton buys a mysterious puzzle box from a dealer in Morocco. Later, when Frank manages to solve the puzzle, hooks and chains appear out of nowhere and tear him apart. After this horrific carnage, the room is left with several swinging chains and the bloody remains of Frank's body. Soon a figure in black robes appears in the room and restores Frank's puzzle box to its original state. Surprisingly, the room becomes as it was before Frank solved the puzzle. Frank had a small affair with his brother Larry's wife just before Larry and Julia got married. Despite being married to Larry, Julia still had feelings for Frank. One day, Larry cut his hand in a minor accident and the blood dripped from his hand onto the attic floor. As soon as this happened, Frank's body was resurrected in the form of a skinless human figure. Julia finds the seemingly undead Frank, and because of her feelings for him, she agrees to help him with whatever he needs. Frank explains to Julia that in order to get his old self back, he must consume the life from dying people. The blood has brought me this far. I need more. Frank had exhausted all forms of sensual pleasure and sought new arenas of sexual and physical satisfaction. To achieve this, he sought the help of the puzzle box, which was the portal to an alternate reality where one could experience extreme carnal pleasures once the puzzle was solved. Demonic creatures called Cenobites appear. Julia picks up men from bars and takes them to her house so that Frank can consume them after mortally wounding them by stabbing them. Frank sticks his hand into the dying men's wounds to rejuvenate himself. This continues until Larry's daughter Kirsty suspects Julia and spies on her. She follows Julia and takes a man to the attic to feed Frank, interrupting him. Frank tries to attack Kirsty, but she manages to escape with a puzzle. However, she soon collapses and wakes up in a hospital, where she solves the puzzle naturally. Several Cenobites and a demonic creature called the Engineer appear. The leader of the Cenobites, Pinhead, tells Kirsty that they are simply explorers from another dimension, seeking new forms of physical pleasure. They can no longer distinguish between pain and pleasure as they attempt to return Kirsty to their realm. She tells them that Frank has escaped. Kirsty tries to trade Frank in exchange for her safety from the Cenobites. Meanwhile, Frank has killed Larry and is wearing Larry's skin. When Kirsty returns home, Frank and Julia attempt to kill Kirsty to complete Frank's rejuvenation, but Frank accidentally kills Julia. The Cenobites reappear and take Frank for good. This time, they have torn Frank apart. The Cenobites try to take Kirsty, but she manages to banish them back using the puzzle box. The film ends with Kirsty throwing the box into a funeral pyre and a winged skeletal creature taking the box. The box eventually reaches the Moroccan merchant who sold it to Frank. Hellraiser writer and director Clive Barker gave birth to a whole new breed of horror films. It was bizarre and grotesque, but effective and terrifying in equal measure. He presents the Cenobites as a peculiar mix of vampires and zombies. But these demonic creatures remain far scarier than both zombies and vampires, because not only are they ruthless and mindless, but they also have a purpose and a goal, despite being made on a budget of just under $1 million. The special effects, music, and grim theme of the sets add even more value to Hellraiser. Barker has delivered a film that is dark, intense, and seriously gruesome. Hellbound Hellraiser 2 1988 Frank had murdered Larry and immediately orphaned Kirsty. Kirsty was immediately taken to a psychiatric hospital where she was placed under the care of Dr. Chennard and his assistant Kyle McRae. Chandra and Kyle interrogated Kirsty, and she told them that they had to destroy the bloody mattress that her stepmother Julia had died on. You have to destroy that mattress without Kirsty knowing. Dr. Channard is a man obsessed with a puzzle box or the laminate configuration. After hearing Kirsty's story, he takes the mattress home and asks a mentally ill patient to lie on it and cut himself with a razor while the patient's blood hits the mattress. Julia reappears from the dead in a skinless body. Kyle doesn't believe Kirsty's story and investigates her claims. He happens to witness the entire episode of Julia's resurrection, but is smart and quick enough to flee. Julia seduces Channard, and he agrees to give her more patience. She can feed and regenerate her. Meanwhile, Kyle tells Kirsty that he believed her, and the two leave to stop Channard. It is all true, but Julia has now fully recovered, and she kills Kyle while knocking Kirsty unconscious. Shannon and Julia kidnap another patient named Tiffany because she has an affinity for solving puzzles. They force her to solve the lamentation configuration. She does so, and they enter the labyrinthine realm of the Cenobites. Julia betrays Channard and the god of the infernal realm. Leviathan transforms him into a Cenobite. Meanwhile, Pinhead and the other Cenobites discover Kirsty, who has been ensnared by Julia's spell. The Cenobites inform her that she is free to explore their realm. Kirsty encounters Frank, who reveals that he had impersonated her father and deceived her into believing that her father was in peril. However, Julia intervenes by killing Frank as an act of vengeance for his earlier actions of killing her and consuming her body. In the aftermath, Julia herself perishes, leaving behind only her skin. Channard, now a Cenobite, locates Kirsty and Tiffany while they attempt to escape, yet Pinhead and the other Cenobites thwart his attempt to kill them. Despite Channard's overpowering strength against the other Cenobites, Kirsty and Tiffany succeed in escaping and sealing the gate to hell that the lament configuration had opened. Clive Barker authored the narrative for Hellbound, and the film heavily relies on its predecessor. However, the most significant aspect is the brief backstory of Pinhead, who is actually a British soldier named Elliot Spencer. Spencer had solved the laminate configuration and was a Cenobite. Dr. Tony Randall followed in Barker's footsteps and made the film a more grand, gory experience with some dark goings-on. He gave us a glimpse into the hell of Leviathan, and we can't thank him enough for the sequels. It's important for directors to not only stick to the core of the story, but also expand on the backstory and subplots. Randall was one of the editors on the previous film and took over the director's job for this one. He intelligently cast Claire Higgins as Julia, Ashley Lawrence as Kirsty Barker, and Ryder Atkins in pivotal roles. The films were brimming with ideas, and it was certain that Pinhead would be a recurring character. I Am the Road Hellraiser 3 Hell on Earth 1992. Pinhead has come to the startling revelation that he was once a British army captain during World War I named Elliot Spencer. This knowledge splits the demon into two parts. The first part is his former self, Spencer, who ends up in limbo, or a part of hell where the souls of those who die in original sin without being assigned to the hell of the damned reside. The second part is Pinhead himself, now trapped in a pillar called the Pillar of Souls with distorted faces and river-like figures. An ambitious reporter named Joey Summerskill finds a teenage clubber with chains embedded in his body. These chains become sentient in the hospital emergency room and tear the clubber's body apart. Joey soon encounters another clubber, Terry, who tells her that the chains came from a strange puzzle box she found near a pillar in the Boiler Room Club owned by J.P. Monroe, and that Monroe had purchased the Pillars of Souls and kept them in his club. Pinhead and Monroe made an arrangement wherein Monroe would bring clubgoers to Pinhead, and in exchange, Pinhead would grant him immense powers and otherworldly pleasures. While investigating Terry's actions concerning Joey and the Lament configuration, they discover a videotape featuring Kirsty Cotton. This video explains that the puzzle box is the sole method to banish Pinhead back to hell. Although I understand its function, it is inherently painful. Meanwhile, Joey experiences recurring dreams about her father's demise during the Vietnam War. In one such dream, Spencer informs her that Pinhead will unleash chaos on Earth in violation of the Cenobite Code. The only way to halt Pinhead's rampage is to merge Spencer's soul with Pinhead and subsequently use the puzzle box to banish him back to hell. Joey acquires the box and uses it to bring him forth at the club. There, Terry encounters Monroe, who intends to offer her to Pinhead. However, she strikes a deal with Pinhead, agreeing to sacrifice Monroe in exchange for her transformation into a Cenobite. At this point, Pinhead is freed from his confinement and begins to wreak havoc on the club guards. As soon as this news reached Joey, she rushed to the club. Pinhead demanded Joey's laminate configuration, but she refused and escaped the spot, only to be chased by several of Pinhead's demons. She is pinned down by the Cenobites at a construction site, but she manages to solve the puzzle and sends all the Cenobites back to hell. However, this brings her to Limbo, where Pinhead threatens her to give him the box. Thank you, Joey. Here, Spencer's soul attaches to Pinhead, and Joey stabs Pinhead through the heart with a box that had turned into a dagger. Joey buries the puzzle box in a pile of concrete. But later it turns out that the interior of the completed construction site was a replica of the puzzle box. Directed by Anthony Hickox, the film Hell on Earth is quite different from its predecessors. For example, it was the first film of the anthology to be directed in the United States, and you will definitely be able to feel it. While watching, Doug Bradley's portrayal of Pinhead developed to great levels. Pinhead emerged as the lead antagonist of the film, and Doug Bradley was highly effective in playing the dual roles of Elliot Spencer and Pinhead. Hickox ensured that there was no dull moment in the film, keeping both the film and his Cenobites in constant motion. Clive Barker's New World Pictures and Film Futures faced financial difficulties, and eventually, Miramax took control of the film. Nevertheless, even in the absence of Barker's direct influence, this third installment of the Hellraiser series is regarded as one of the best. However, one would not have objected to the inclusion of more strippers, as the film is primarily set in a nightclub. Hellraiser 4, Bloodline, 1996, presents a story set in 1796 in Paris, where a French toymaker named Philippe Lamartillon creates the greatest work of his life at the behest of an aristocrat named Duke de Lisle, a man devoid of most moral principles, a sense of responsibility, or sexual restraint. This invention was the Lament configuration. In the third film, Angelique learns about the building through a magazine and requests Jacques to accompany her to Manhattan. When he declines, she kills him. Subsequently, she successfully arrives at the building and attempts to seduce Merchant, only to find herself unsuccessful. After discovering that the laminate configuration is concealed within the building, she cleverly deceives a security guard into solving it, which subsequently summons Pinhead. Initially, Angelique and Pinhead engage in combat. However, they eventually agree to cooperate in order to prevent John Merchant from creating the Elysium configuration or the anti-laminate configuration. Although Angelique originally aspired to assist Pinhead's cause, she has grown weary of being a minion of Hell and desires that Merchant activate the Elysium configuration to liberate her from Hell's grasp. However, Merchant's prototype proves to be a failure, leading to his death at the hands of Pinhead. He solved Angelique's puzzle box and sent both the Cenobites back to Hell. More than a century later, in 2127, another descendant of La Martian named Paul Merchant seals himself in a room on a space station called the Minus. He instructs a robot to solve the Lamina configuration and summons the Cenobites, including Pinhead and his new servant Angelique. It is subsequently revealed that the ship itself was the completed design of the Elysium configuration. The Cenobites enter the space station, and he escapes in a pod. Shortly thereafter, he activates the Elysium configuration, and a series of lights and mirrors emerge, transforming the Minus into the puzzle box. This scene marked the definitive end of Pinhead. The film was an ambitious project, or at least that is what Ryder Atkinson believed. What was intended to be a film of approximately 180 minutes was ultimately reduced to around 80 minutes. Bloodline is essentially 3 films condensed into one. In one such magnanimous project, skillful direction, efficient storytelling, a substantial budget, and even greater dedication are imperative, yet Miramax lacked at least 2 of these essential elements. Consequently, the final film fell far short of expectations. This outcome was not entirely unforeseen, as the studio exerted more influence than was appropriate. They did not incorporate any ideas from Barker, and director Kevin Younger opted to utilize the pseudonym Alan Smith The, an alias employed by directors wishing to remain uncredited. He departed from filming when the studio insisted on altering the relationships between characters and demanded additional scenes. Ultimately, Joe Chappelle assumed control, providing the film with a happy ending and reducing its runtime by over 25 minutes. It can be argued that the franchise experienced a significant setback with Bloodline and was unable to recover in subsequent years. Bloodline aimed to narrate the stories of the past, present, and future, yet it ultimately illustrated how executive interference undermines artistic freedom. Hellraiser 5, Inferno, 2000, features Joseph Thorne, an utterly corrupt and immoral police detective based in Denver. Throughout his duty, he indulges in drugs, sex, and other questionable activities. Thorne is assigned to investigate a ritual murder and discovers an enigmatic puzzle box. He brings the box home to satisfy his obsession with puzzles. Shortly after solving it, he begins to experience hallucinations involving bizarre entities and creatures. He envisions himself being seduced by a mutilated woman and pursued by a creature devoid of eyes or limbs. Eventually, Thorne identifies a connection between these hallucinations and the individual responsible for the ritual murder, concluding that the perpetrator is known as the engineer who has abducted a young child. However, as Thorne attempts to locate the engineer, a series of murders begins to target his family, friends, and acquaintances. Compounding the situation, the engineer leaves a child's finger at each crime scene. His psychiatrist seeks to cure him of the bizarre hallucinations. The psychiatrist reveals that he is Pinhead and that Thorne has been in the realm of the Cenobites since the moment he solved the Lament configuration. The Cenobites have been inflicting psychological torture on Thorne for the crimes he has committed and the cruelties he has inflicted upon others. They come for him and then depart. It is revealed that the engineer is a creation of his own mind, representing the manifestation of Thorne's brutality, while the little child symbolizes his innocence. However, Thorne has continuously killed his innocence by indulging in acts of sexual gratification and other sins. Pinhead informs him that he will now be subjected to eternal pain and suffering for the deeds he committed in the mortal realm. The film was directed by the same individual who helmed Marvel's 2016 hit film Doctor Strange. Indeed, director Scott Derrickson endeavored to revive the franchise. However, the executives opted for a highly cautious approach and ultimately chose to rewrite an independent script to align with the expectations of the Hellraiser universe. As a result, the film underperformed. Hellraiser films are typically characterized by their embodiment of body horror, yet the 2000 installment leaned more towards psychological torture than physical suffering. Despite the potential strength of this concept, it did not resonate with the expectations of Hellraiser fans. This was the first film in the franchise to be released directly to video, while the previous 4 enjoyed theatrical releases. The most compelling scenes in the film feature Doug Bradley as Pinhead, and these brief 4 minutes are the primary reason why every Hellraiser enthusiast chose to watch this installment. Interestingly, Stephen Jones, who was involved in the promotion of other Hellraiser films, had drafted an ambitious script in which he envisioned the return of Kirsty Cotton, positioning her against the cult. This project aimed to unleash Leviathan himself upon the Earth, and the entirety of London would be encased within a colossal laminate configuration. However, such an ambitious plan required an equally grand budget, and the executives were disinclined to risk facing financial ruin. In Hellraiser 6, Hellseeker, 2002, Trevor and his wife Kirsty are involved in a severe car accident when their vehicle plunges off a bridge into a river below. Police divers discover that both doors of the car were open, yet there is no indication of Kirsty's presence. The doors were ajar when the car was retrieved from the water. Nonetheless, Trevor managed to escape and save his own life. A month later, Trevor awakens in a hospital, only to find himself as the prime suspect in his wife's murder. Detectives Givens and Lang frequently visit him, but oddly, they never appear together. Furthermore, the incident resulted in a head injury for Trevor, leading him to experience various hallucinations. He struggles to distinguish between reality and fantasy, making matters increasingly dire. He witnesses his friend Brett committing suicide. Later, Trevor is summoned to the police station and taken to the basement to identify a body. It is revealed there that both Lang and Givens are, in fact, a demon with 2 heads. That is why they never appear to him simultaneously. Trevor escapes with his life and ends up in a morgue, with a body lying on the operating table. He approaches to uncover the body when Pinhead appears and informs him that his wife Kirsty is still alive. Trevor was a highly promiscuous man who engaged with many women and always regarded Kirsty as a hindrance to his lifestyle. He compelled her to solve the Lament configuration, which she successfully did. However, she struck a deal with Pinhead, offering him 5 souls in exchange for her life. "I will bring you 5 souls in exchange for mine," she said. Pinhead informs Trevor that he has received the souls of 3 of Trevor's mistresses, as well as that of Brett, who sought to kill Kirsty for her inheritance. Upon uncovering the deceased on the operating table, he was taken aback to discover that it was, in fact, his own body. It is revealed that Kirsty had murdered all 4 individuals and framed her husband for the crimes. She shot him in the head while he was driving, causing the vehicle to plunge into the river, thereby making the incident appear to be a suicide. Trevor's soul has since been condemned to hell, where the Cenobites have subjected him to psychological torment by compelling him to hallucinate and forget his previous life. His punishment for betraying his wife and failing to embrace his true identity involved reconstructing his life and rediscovering who he was. The 6th installment of the franchise closely follows its predecessor, but goes further in adhering to the Hellraiser mythology. Like Hellraiser 5, this film was developed after revising a pre-existing script, yet director Rick Boda and writers Carl V. Dupree and Tim Day cleverly managed to bring back Kirsty Cotton, portrayed by Ashley Lawrence. The film introduces a straightforward plot. The film revolves around a man who may or may not have murdered his wife, taking the narrative in unimaginable directions. It functions as a psychological thriller, a horror story, as well as a revenge drama. Director Rick Boda defied the producers by screening the film for Clive Barker prior to its release, seeking his insights and suggestions. Unfortunately, this was the last Hellraiser film to which Barker was directly or indirectly linked. Despite being considerably better than its 2 immediate predecessors, the film failed to recapture the acclaim that the Hellraiser franchise enjoyed during the 1980s and early 1990s. The notion that evil runs in the family is echoed in Hellraiser, Deader, 2005. Charles dispatches his ambitious employee and journalist, Amy Klein, to Bucharest after receiving a videotape. The narrative depicts the ritualistic murder and reanimation of a member of a cult known as the Deaders. Amy follows the return address on a tape and discovers the residence of a woman named Marla. However, she finds Marla's corpse positioned within the lament configuration. Amy takes the lament configuration to her hotel and opens it, only to experience bizarre hallucinations and a nightmare in which she summons Pinhead. During her journey, Amy encounters a local man named Joey, who advises her to steer clear of the Deaders and cautions her about the self-destructive device in her possession. Eventually, Amy tracks down the leader of the Deaders, a man named Winter Lamartillon. Winter is a direct descendant of the French toymaker Le Marchand, who invented the lament configuration. As a result, Winter believes he has the potential to command the Cenobites. However, he believes that the puzzle can only be deciphered by someone displaying trauma-induced nihilism. To advance his agenda, he established the secret cult of the Deaders, attracting emotionally troubled followers in the hope that they would unravel the puzzle for him. He presents Amy with a waking dream in which she relives her harrowing childhood. Her father sexually abused her, and ultimately, she managed to kill him. Upon returning to reality, Amy opened the box and summoned the Cenobites, who commenced a massacre of the Deaders. Pinhead rebuked and mocked Winter for presuming he could manipulate the Cenobites, stating, "That is where you are mistaken, painfully mistaken." Pinhead intended to take Amy to hell, where her father awaited her, but Amy chose to end her own life. This action caused the box to close, banishing the Cenobites back to hell once more. The film concludes with Charles dispatching yet another young reporter to investigate Amy, who has disappeared. Missing in action like the films that preceded it, Deader was based on a script that was initially not written as a Hellraiser script and was later reworked to fit into the Hellraiser mythos. Having said that, the film intricately follows the core elements that Clive Barker created. In fact, it follows the Le Marchand episode from the 4th installment and provides more screen time to the Cenobites than the previous films that were released straight to video. Allow me to finish what he started. Therefore, Deader has a rather unfortunate title, but is arguably the best Hellraiser film that was released straight to video. Carrie Warher, as Amy Klein, delivered a satisfactory performance as a young woman with a troubled past. She portrayed a well-developed character who was both cynical and confident, and credit must be given to director Rick Boda for not reducing Klein's character to a mere stereotype. Another reason why the film performed better was that the technology had significantly improved at the time of release, and this advancement aided in delivering effective results. This is just the beginning. Hellraiser 8, Hellworld 2005, depicts Adam and his friends, who are addicted to a game called Hellworld, which is based on the Hellraiser series. The game takes such a toll on Adam that he tragically ends his life, leading his friends to feel immense guilt for his death, believing they could have prevented it by intervening in Adam's gaming addiction. However, 2 years later, the 5 friends receive an invitation to a Hellworld-themed secret party, which they attend reluctantly. Upon arrival, the host greets them with drinks and provides them with cell phones for communication. Soon after, Allison, Derek, and Mike are seemingly killed by the host, Pinhead, and other Cenobites, while Chelsea and Jake are hunted by additional Cenobites. Chelsea takes refuge in the attic, where she discovers Adam's belongings and realizes that the host is, in fact, Adam's father, who holds the friends responsible for their failure to help Adam overcome his addiction. In a surprising turn of events, Jake and Chelsea find themselves locked in caskets, receiving messages from the host on their respective cell phones. The messages indicate that they have been administered potent hallucinogens with strong psychedelic properties, and that their experiences are merely products of their own imagination and guilty conscience. The host also informs Chelsea that Allison, Derek, and Mike have perished in their respective caskets. Fortunately, the police rescue Chelsea and Jake. However, the host rummages through Adam's belongings and discovers the lament configuration. Upon opening the puzzle, Pinhead emerges along with other Cenobites, before mercilessly dismembering the host. Pinhead commends Adam while ridiculing his father. Derek was shot alongside Deader, and while Deader was a competently produced budget sequel, Hellworld is egregiously misguided and perplexing. The Hellraiser universe is portrayed as a game titled Hellworld, leaving fans of the film utterly bewildered. Between Hellworld and Hellraiser, Pinhead's character is reduced to that of a horror monster wielding a meat cleaver, running around to decapitate individuals, which is a far cry from his original conception. Additionally, the film diminishes its potential audience by assuming that viewers are already familiar with the Hellraiser franchise. While this approach could have benefited the film, the subpar direction and disjointed script detract from such an opportunity. This installment appears to target a younger audience drawn to gore, a significant departure from the focus of the previous 7 films. Hellworld aspires to little more than to showcase a series of deaths among young characters, presenting what feels like a mere compilation of gory scenes that could be viewed in any order, resulting in a similar overall impact. For the record, Henry Cavill stars as Mike in this film. Yes, the Man of Steel. Therefore, if you choose to watch this film, let it be for the presence of the mighty Superman. The time will come when our own twisted horror film, Hellraiser 9, Revelations 2011, unfolds. Nico Bradley and Steve Craven are 2 young boys who venture to Mexico with the hopes of indulging in drugs and casual relationships. During their escapades, they encounter a girl, but tragically, Nico kills her during the act. Subsequently, the boys mysteriously disappear, prompting the Mexican authorities to deliver a videotape, Steve's personal belongings, and a strange puzzle box to Steve's mother. A year later, the families of the 2 boys gather for dinner, where Steve's sister, Emma, insists on viewing the tape to attain closure. Upon acquiring the videotape, Emma discovers that Nico had been presented with a puzzle box by a peculiar man who promised it would grant otherworldly, sensual pleasures. Emma identifies the lament configuration from the video, and, while attempting to comprehend it, Steve appears, covered in blood. The family hastens to take him to the hospital, but becomes stranded en route. However, a flashback shows that Nico managed to solve the lament configuration and was taken to hell by the Cenobites, where he was tortured and mutilated. He contacted Steve while he was having sex with a prostitute, and Nico asked him to kill this prostitute and others so that his body could rejuvenate. Steve elongated as per his friend's wishes, but even after many murders, Nico could not get his skin back. DIY killer, I'm not doing this for you anymore. Nico, of course, did not want help anymore, and this was when Nico killed him and wore his skin, but a dying Steve made a deal with the Cenobites who turned him into one of them so that he could get his revenge. It is revealed that the Steve who crashed the dinner party was in fact Nico wearing Steve's skin. Emma opens the box, and several Cenobites, including Steve, appear to take Nico, but Emma's father kills Nico. Dimension Films only made the movie because they would have lost the rights to Hellraiser if they hadn't released a movie in 2011. Of course, it was a movie that was conceived in a matter of weeks. Dimension didn't think it was a good reason to make a movie, so the budget was a measly $300,000. There was absolutely no thought given to filmmaking or artistic techniques, and the final product can only be considered product. It would be wise not to call it a Hellraiser movie. Even Doug Bradley turned down the role of Pinhead because of the rush in which the movie was filmed. This would be the first Hellraiser movie that he didn't star in. The movie was marketed as being straight from the mind of Clive Barker. However, Barker posted a profane tweet denying the claims, and the tweet was so rude that it's safe to not repeat it here, but we will anyway. Hellraiser 10 Verdict 2018. Detectives Sean David and Christine investigate murders committed by a serial killer known as the Preceptor, whose crimes follow the 10 Commandments. Meanwhile, Pinhead and the Stygian Inquisition's auditor are determined to rethink their methods of collecting souls, as ever-evolving human technology renders the lamentation configuration archaic. A lead leads Sean to an abandoned house where a local criminal named Carl Watkins has mysteriously disappeared. Sean enters the house but is knocked unconscious, and later finds himself in the domain of the Stygian Inquisition, where judgment will be passed on the sins he committed on Earth. However, the Archangel of Wisdom, Understanding, and Judgment, Jaffield, appears and orders Sean's release. You let him go. Don't you really understand? He escaped using the Lamentation configuration, and later has nightmares about Cenobites and other denizens of hell, who pledged judgment and redemption upon anyone who sought to employ the Lament configuration. Sean and David return to the house, but discover no remnants of hell or the Inquisition. Later, Sean reveals his identity as the killer and compels the other two detectives to open the Lament configuration and summon the Cenobites. Sean attempts to trade his life, offering Pinhead the souls of David and Christine. However, Pinhead declines, and the auditor of the Inquisition informs Sean that he's been found guilty of his crimes. No deal can be brokered. Nonetheless, Jaffiel intervenes once more, requesting that they spare Sean, as he is part of a grander divine scheme intended to instill fear within the hearts of sinners. There are matters at play that constitute a larger plan in which he is involved. Pinhead, having no tolerance for this any longer, deceives Christine into killing Sean as a result of this subterfuge. The character Pinhead is expelled from hell and is compelled to live his life as an immortal writer and director. Gary J. Tunnicliffe, who had been associated with the Hellraiser franchise for decades as a makeup artist, had a vision for a Hellraiser film and pitched the idea to producer Bob Weinstein. Dimension Films was again obligated to produce a Hellraiser film to maintain the rights, which presented Tunnicliffe with his opportunity. After 30 years since the inception of his idea, he was finally able to create a film that, unlike the previous installments, had a script and story developed specifically for the franchise. Doug Bradley was approached to reprise his role as Pinhead, but declined, citing the poor quality of the sequels produced by Dimension Films. Consequently, Paul T. Taylor was cast as Pinhead, and Tunnicliffe made the commendable decision not to mimic or replicate Doug's portrayal. Instead, he endowed Taylor's Pinhead with an entirely new identity, appearance, and essence. The Judgment proved to be the best effort in a long series of Hellraiser sequels produced since Clive Barker's original. It deviated from the standard storyline and served as a breath of fresh air. However, it suffered significantly due to the constraints of a low budget and the waning popularity of the Hellraiser franchise. In fact, the film received less publicity to mitigate negative criticism. The question arises, why is the Hellraiser franchise declining? Hellraiser was not the first film to combine eroticism and horror within a single narrative. Predecessors such as Humanoids from the Deep, Cat People, and Seminoid had explored similar themes. Nevertheless, Clive Barker's Hellraiser forged a distinctly new mythology and provided audiences with a genuine glimpse of sadomasochism on the big screen. Despite an anthology consisting of 10 films, genuine interest diminished after the initial 4, and the subsequent 6 appear to be feeble attempts to sustain the franchise, often produced merely to ensure that Dimension Films could maintain the rights to Hellraiser. There are numerous reasons why the series failed to maintain popular loyalty. Clive Barker became a household name as a horror writer, but his involvement with the franchise effectively concluded after the first 2 films. If one observes closely, in the first 2 films, he never intended for the Cenobites to be the focal point of the Hellraiser universe. They merely served as entities that illuminated and extracted human emotions. Barker's Cenobites are not the Machiavellian villains that the world remembers them to be. Rather, they are reasonable beings who believe in a cause and are prepared to negotiate. The Cenobites, and particularly Pinhead, were in some respects more rational and less monstrous than characters like Frank, Julia, and Shannard, who did not hesitate to take the lives of their own family members or exploit mentally ill patients to further their selfish agendas. However, this portrayal of the Cenobites was sacrificed to make them typical horror film monsters, but it is not the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This paradigm shift in Pinhead's character and the reduction of the human drama element was against the source material written by Barker in his novel. In 99 out of 100 cases, if you deviate from the source, you will fall flat on your face. The subsequent films after Bloodline were produced not because Miramax or Dimension wanted to deliver quality sequels, but because they were compelled to release a film every few years to retain the rights. Naturally, the quality was disregarded, and most sequels were created using scripts or independent films, merely adding Cenobites here and there. The 5th film, Hellraiser, Inferno, strayed so far from the mythos that it scarcely felt like a Hellraiser movie. The next installment was an even greater blunder, as someone believed it would be a good idea to transform the mythology of a cult classic film in a video game displayed on screen. These marked the final blows to the Hellraiser franchise's legacy. Indeed, there was a point when both Clive Barker and Doug Bradley opted to separate themselves from the subpar sequels. What began as an intelligent erotic horror film series, characterized by a strong emphasis on human emotions and character traits, was diminished by executives into a mere series focused on demons slaughtering humans for mere entertainment, blood, and senseless gore. However, there is hope in the form of the Hellraiser HBO TV series, representing a light at the end of the tunnel. Although there are currently no discussions regarding an 11th Hellraiser film, we find optimism in the development of a potential television show. Clive Barker regained the rights to Hellraiser in 2020 and is involved in producing the series. The script is in development, with contributions from esteemed individuals such as Mark Verheiden and Michael Dougherty, with Mark previously working on notable projects like Battlestar Galactica and Daredevil. While Michael has delivered remarkable works such as Godzilla, King of the Monsters, it is safe to assert that Barker's ambitious project is in capable hands. However, the ongoing pandemic has halted most filming activities, and we may expect a release date and further information concerning casting as soon as the situation improves. Unfortunately, none of the original stars, including Doug Bradley and Ashley Lawrence, have announced their involvement with the project. Nonetheless, the show remains in the pre-production phase, making it premature to draw any conclusive statements. We are simply pleased that Barker has resumed his work, and if you appreciated our content, please do not forget to like and subscribe to us if you have not already. Wishing you all the best and urging you to stay safe. Thank you, everyone.